Coffee begins to go stale within an hour of being ground. Increased exposure to oxygen and loss of carbon dioxide result in an accelerated loss of flavor and aroma. And for that reason, soldiers in the Union Army were given whole green coffee beans as part of their ration kit in the American Civil War. They would roast them, run them through a portable grinder that was given to every company, and then everybody would have fresh coffee. That was the 1860s. And yet today, 2/3 of the coffee consumed in America comes from the grocery store, where the freshness is dubious and most of the coffee is pre-ground. So 160 years ago, soldiers eating hardtack knew more about coffee than most of us do today. Where did we go wrong? And how are we finding our way back? My name is Matt. This is episode 3 of the coffee season. Don't go anywhere.
This season on City Boy, I traveled to Guatemala to learn everything I could about coffee. In the past 2 weeks, I've shown you how it's grown, how it's milled, and this week I was going to speak to some of Guatemala's most respected farmers to learn what makes their coffee so good.
But after last week's episode, a lot of you contacted me and said a similar thing. Basically, it's amazing how cheap coffee is given all the work that goes into producing it. And that's true, but it got me thinking a lot about cost, both how cheap coffee can be and how much people complain over the price of a cappuccino. Nowadays, there are 2 types of coffee. There's specialty coffee and commodity coffee.
This is a bag of Ellen Huerto's pea berry coffee. You may remember seeing the cherries in episode 2. This is specialty coffee, and some of the best that you can find in Guatemala. It costs $19 for about 15 ounces of coffee. This is a can of Maxwell House coffee, and it's commodity coffee. It costs $5 for 11.5 ounces.
Now, yes, taste is subjective, but there's an objective difference in quality between these two. The plant, the way it's grown, the way it's milled, even the way it's purchased. Now, we're gonna talk about that more on an upcoming episode, but for now, let's just wind the clock back to a time where coffee was coffee. And then we'll try to figure out how we got to where we are now.
Before the Civil War, most Americans roasted their own coffee in a frying pan at home. I decided to attempt this to find out just what the experience was like. It's pretty long and arduous. You have to keep the beans moving to ensure some consistency in the level of the roast, and while you're doing it, beans fly out of the pan, and my stove was covered in residue by the end of the process. And to top it off, no matter how hard you try, you still wind up with some beans that are scorched and some that are undercooked. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you can watch me roast the beans from start to finish. See the link in the description below. In 1864, an ambitious Scottish-American inventor named Jabez Burns forever changed the world of coffee when he invented a roasting machine with corkscrew-like blades inside of it. As the drums rotated, the coffee was constantly moving, so it had little contact with the hot metal, which eliminates the risk of scorching. This style of roasting is incredibly effective and still used to this day. A year after its invention, Pittsburgh's John Arbuckle would change coffee in the United States forever. He bought one of Burns's machines and started roasting coffee in 1-pound paper bags. Now, he wasn't the first person to sell prepackaged coffee. James Folger was actually selling ground coffee in tins to the men who traveled west during the gold rush since about 1850. But Arbuckle was the first person to mass produce roasted coffee in a standardized package. Aside from freshly roasting the coffee, Arbuckle's company glazed the coffee with egg and confectioner's sugar. He claimed it helped the coffee stay fresher and gave it a richer flavor than other coffee, but it also added weight to the final package. Arbuckle's Ariosa coffee would take the nation by storm, becoming more synonymous with coffee than Starbucks is today. In 1881, the Empire Stores building on the Brooklyn waterfront in current-day Dumbo became a warehouse for Arbuckle. And shortly thereafter, their factories and warehouses took over the whole neighborhood. Ariosa started a new era of coffee. and others took note. In 1879, Boston's Chase and Sanborn became the Seal brand when they started sealing their cans of ground coffee. Unfortunately, they were sealing the oxygen into the can with the beans, so it was more of a marketing ploy than an effective way of keeping the coffee fresh. But still, Chase and Sanborn were coffee enthusiasts, and they introduced a number of interesting blends to the market. They were also early proponents of test roasting their coffee before they bought it. In 1886, Joel Cheek started marketing a new brand of coffee called Maxwell House. It was a special blend of beans that he created for Nashville's esteemed Maxwell House Hotel. The company would later claim that Teddy Roosevelt loved the coffee so much during a stay at the hotel that he claimed it was good to the last drop.
Unfortunately, this new era of prepackaged coffee led to some deceptive practices.
By the 1870s and 1880s, ground coffee was being filled with adulterants. Ground up items like cloth, seeds, potatoes, sawdust, and chicory were added to cut costs. Discerning coffee lovers would fight back by purchasing coffee in bulk from trustworthy grocers, but in 1900, San Francisco's Hill Brothers introduced the first vacuum-packaged coffee tin to the market, and it changed everything. No longer was coffee a locally roasted product, it was now a nationwide commodity. With so many brands vying for attention, advertising became the key to attracting buyers. Arbuckle Coffee learned this the hard way. After years of insisting they wouldn't pay for national advertising, the one-time juggernaut faded into obscurity. Companies increasingly started to cut corners, blending cheaper beans into their products so that they could afford pricey nationwide advertising campaigns and celebrity spokespeople. By the 1940s, most American coffee started to seem pretty similar. Most of it came from Brazil, was being roasted in a similar way, and brewed after sitting too long on a shelf at a grocery store. Then, after World War II, coffee hit a new low. Instant coffee, which had been used in ration kits in World War I and II, went mainstream. Ultimately, the 20th century was dominated by brands and commercials that made us feel a certain way about coffee, and slowly, that became more important than how the coffee tasted. By the 1990s, 3 companies controlled 80% of the U.S. coffee market: General Foods, Procter & Gamble, and Nestle.
I want to take a brief moment to announce the winner of last week's bag of Joe Coffee's Bella Carmona. I have to tell you guys, giving away coffee has actually become one of my favorite things about doing this web series, but it's also really hard for me not to drink this really good coffee as it sits here waiting for me to send it out. But I am really looking forward to sending this to the winner this week, and that is Michael Wallenberg in Portland, Oregon. This will be coming your way soon, Michael. Congratulations. This week's giveaway is from Cleveland's Troubadour Coffee. The farm that it's from is San Isidro Chacaya, which I actually was going to present in this episode, but it'll be in the next episode. They're one of my favorite farms in Guatemala, and I'm really looking forward to giving away this bag. Now, there are 2 ways that you can enter. One is to leave a comment in the comment section below, and the other is to join our Patreon. Patreon people automatically get 2 entries. So every contest, pretty simple. You could actually enter 3 times if you left a comment and joined the Patreon. But anyway, I'm looking forward to giving this one away. I really hope to be sharing it with you. So last we left coffee, things were looking pretty grim, right? It had become sort of a bland drink from what once was a promising beverage that people were trying to improve. And I know what you're probably thinking. This is where Starbucks comes along. Well, sort of.
Starbucks had actually been around for a little while, and there would be no Starbucks if it hadn't been for Peet's. In 1966, when the nation's coffee was at its worst, Dutch expat Alfred Peet opened a coffee shop in Berkeley, California. Peet had grown up in a coffee family, and after taking a job as an importer in the United States, he was dismayed by the state of the industry. Folgers bought lots of Brazil's Central American Standards and Robustas. I couldn't understand why, in the richest country in the world, they were drinking such poor quality coffee. When he was unexpectedly laid off, Pete opened a shop on the corner of Walnut and Vine and started roasting high-quality beans from origins around the world and educating his customers about the flavor nuances of his various offerings.
Pete was one of several specialty shops that cropped up around that time selling coffee beans. And this is what the industry refers to as the second wave. The first wave was the mass marketers, but the second wave were people that somehow knew how good coffee could be and were fighting back against instant coffee.
One of those shops was Starbucks, founded in 1971 by three friends in Seattle, Gordon Boker, Jerry Baldwin, and Zev Siegel. For some time, Boker had been driving to Vancouver to buy beans from a specialty shop. And soon, his friends were asking him to bring back some of that delicious coffee. So Boker, Baldwin, and Siegel decided to open up a shop of their own. Siegel did some research at a local library and contacted Alfred Pete, who was happy to teach them about the coffee business. After serving as apprentices in Berkeley, the men opened Seattle's first Starbucks location. Initially, their focus was similar to Pete's. They sold high-quality roasted beans and the equipment to help people brew it. Then, in 1987, Starbucks hired Howard Schultz as their marketing director. Long story short, Schultz had a different vision for Starbucks than the founders. Eventually, Boker, Baldwin, and Siegel would buy Pete's coffee, and Schultz would buy Starbucks. The new Starbucks changed its focus from selling coffee beans to selling coffee beverages. They introduced Americans to words like latte and French roast, and even created a few like frappuccino.
Regardless how you feel about Starbucks, they drastically improved America's tired coffee market, revitalizing coffee shop culture and raising everybody's expectations about what a cup of coffee could be. And that paved the way for the third wave of coffee.
The Waves concept was created by Trish Rothgeb of San Francisco's Wrecking Ball Coffee back in 2002. At the time, she was working in Oslo and found the specialty industry moving in a new direction. Long-held assertions were being questioned, and the industry was turning its back on the standardized practices shops like Starbucks had introduced.
More than ever, small coffee shops started putting emphasis on roasting and serving high-quality beans, but they started doing it their way.
Whether popularizing pour-over coffee or getting into bidding wars over award-winning lots of beans, serving cappuccino with microfoam, or opening a pop-up location with AstroTurf and a tennis table, the third wave shops focused on serving a good cup of coffee their way. So when you say to me, coffee should be more expensive, what I want to know is, where are you buying your beans? Are you drinking first wave, second wave, or third wave? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. And for those of you riding that first wave, you're probably wondering, does the more expensive stuff really taste better? Well, that's the topic of our next episode. I promise. On our next episode of City Boy, we'll hear from award-winning farmers as they talk about why their coffee tastes so good, plus the universal method of determining coffee quality.
Thanks for joining me, everyone. Be sure to like, subscribe, and if you'd like to support further, join our Patreon. I look forward to seeing you soon.